5. The safe and effective use of self in psychotherapy. The self is very complex. So today, this morning, and we're going to talk about and explore the important aspect of self, that is the cultural self. You know, our society has become very, very diverse, and we need to know, how we're going to work with our clients from different cultures. Our cultural self is evolving constantly. And on the wall, I show some of you the class picture of my father in grade 4 at Parkdale. And you look at, he's the only Asian. Can you imagine? And even when we were in high school, we were the only Chinese family with 2 Japanese families. 2 years ago, we went back for our class 50th anniversary. I guess because we were the only Chinese family, some of my teachers recognized me. And the language teacher said, I taught you Greek. You didn't teach me Greek, you teach my sister Susan Greek. And you taught me Latin. You know, in the old days, if you want to go into medicine, you must have minimum grade 12 Latin. Well, I have my grade 13 Latin, but you see, our culture has changed. I look around the wall of all the, award-winning students from my high school. You wouldn't believe it, all colors. A lot of Asian, Korean, you name it. Very few blue-eyed blonde hair. You see how it changed over the years? And this is why when we are psychotherapists, we meet people from all over the world. And we need to know what is it, how we could use our cultural self. And this is why we spend some time today talking about our own culture. Some of us may find it very difficult to express it, but I think it is important to find part of, when you talk about identity, it is a cultural self-identity. So basically today we wanted to talk about being a psychotherapist, you must have multicultural competence. And we also wanted to find out what's the meaning of cultural identity. And one of my professors, Paul Peterson, and he talked about unintentional racism. And we talk about microaggression. And you see that on papers, you see that in real life. So this is why it's so important for us to be aware of cultural differences so that we will be effective psychotherapists. And also overall, we talk about the culture. For example, in Asia, we talk about collectivistic society. In North American, what's the word? Individualistic. What's the difference? How can we, from Canada, be able to understand people coming from Asia? I think that is very important. You have to be effective, you have to be respectful, you have to understand. But is it possible for us to learn about all cultures? So that's another question we have to. And then someone just talked to me about how often we talk about our own experience to our clients. That constitutes self-disclosure. What is the function of self-disclosure? Then we're going to talk about that. How much should we disclose? And what was the purpose of disclosure? Was it for me or for his client? And those are very, very important elements that we need to talk about and explore. And also, I'm going to show you the American Psychological Association guideline for practice in multicultural. All right. Paul Peterson's called the multicultural psychology is the fourth force in the mainstream psychology. So it has a place. And he's retired now, but his writing is still very relevant. And, you know, as I said, if you do not have multicultural competence, and your psychotherapy may not be effective. How many times my students come in and say, my clients didn't show up? Why? Because they don't get what they want. Some clients will come in, they want answers to their problem. And here you are, ask them, what's your childhood like? Well, what has childhood to do with what I'm doing? So we have to be very, very sensitive to where the clients are at, and where do we need to lead them, what are the materials that we need or they would be aware of in their lives that will help solve the problem. So I think, as psychotherapists, we must have a lot of tools in our toolbox. And I think this course will provide some of those tools. At least at this time, we could share among ourselves and share the tools that we found in that particular case was useful. So I hope in our group discussion, we will get some of that. So APA has made multicultural competence one of the required area for competency for clinical practice. And I think it is about time. All right, how many people know Stanley Su from California and his brother, Daryl Su and Arredondo? I have met some of these people and they just delineate what do we need to build up our multicultural competencies. One, we talked about this morning, self-awareness. And you have to be aware of your own value system, your own biases. How many people say you do not have any biases? We always do, don't we? There is something that kind of bugged us. Because we are human. We are not angels. We're not perfect, right? It is okay. But we have to be aware of that. And when will those biases come out? And we also need to maybe even document yourself. And you say, today I just feel, and why would they do that? And then you look back and you say, well, yeah, now I know. How am I going to overcome? So by being aware of this so that we can improve our practice, improve our relationship with our clients. And what are the assumptions? Especially when you have multi-generation immigrants. That is a tough one. How many people work with immigrants that first generation immigrants and then the children were born, second generation, and then the third generation? What kind of difficulty have you ever found?
They're actually, the older generation, the first generation, the culture is, they have the historical cultural values and norms. As they have kids here, the kids adapt to the major Canadian culture. There's a conflict between the child and the parents, because the parents are saying this is our traditional culture, but the kids are Canadian in their experience, and they're more geared towards accepting the Canadian culture as opposed to following their parents' culture.
We're not, that's right, thank you. We are not only dealing with generation gaps, we are dealing with cultural gaps within the family. And so it is hard. So your biases may come in. You understand where the parents were coming from, and you also understand where the children is coming from. So are you going to be for the parents? Are you going to be for the kids? That's a difficult situation, isn't it? So you have to examine yourself and say, well, do I have a bias? Right? And that's very important. And also we need to understand the client's worldview. See, the parents, the new immigrants, first generation immigrants, they have a different worldview. And then the children also have a different worldview. Then also about understand your own worldview and your understanding, your attitude, and your beliefs. See how complex the self is? So this is why we want to explore the multiple self. And once we grow, and we will be more aware. And then also we need to be culturally sensitive, and we need to develop it's not easy to develop interventions when you're working with families. And so sensitivity is so important. And so from the writing, we talk about how do we examine our own beliefs, the attitude, our learning, and the skills. Okay, culture. What is culture? It's a man-made environment. It is referring to language, religion, and materials, like creations, and also refers to the social norms. And people will say, back home, it's like this and like that. And of course, they believe in religion, and this is how we do things, and everybody has to be this way, and the way of life, and the sense of what is a good life. They come to you because they want to lead a meaningful, good life. What is it? So culture influences all these aspects, and the perception, the knowledge, and their behavior that follow. So culture actually is broader than just race and ethnicity. When we were in Vancouver, you can clearly see the culture between West and East. I don't know about Toronto. Do we? We have pockets, right? We have a pocket of Chinatown. And what else do we have? Korean town. And what else do we have? Italian, Portuguese. That's right. Someone said last night that I could hardly wait to go to, Portuguese to have some Portuguese food. And I felt, what Portuguese food? I don't know, but I know Japanese food, right? So that's all part of culture. Okay, cultural diversity. We talk about different races, different culture group, and also now we add sexual orientation. That's another culture. You look at my refrigerator and you see mixed marriages. Does that constitute a different culture?
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Catherine, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm married to David, who's Hong Kong Chinese, though he was raised in Canada since he was 4. So he's a banana, really. And we joke about that, and I'm becoming more of
banana.
I'm becoming more of an egg.
Oh,
picking up several Chinese traits in myself, but I'm white on the outside. So we are, although a lot of our friends have mixed marriages, so it's a very normal thing for us. In the larger culture, in terms of my family, it's very different because I don't think there is any other mixed marriage. And for David's family, yeah, we're also rare there too, so we're kind of our own thing.
That's
and
right.
Forging our own way in our two families.
You create your own culture,
Yeah.
so that everybody in your family can adjust to the majority culture and to your own created culture.
True.
And after 2 or 3 generations, do you think we're going to have little parts of culture, or do you think we're going to have a big, blended, multicultural society? Right? See, my grandfather's grandfather married to a Jewish white woman, according to legend. So if that is true, I might have a little bit of a Jewish DNA in me. And this is why my brother had curly hair. He got some red. And yes, and when my mom, my dad had a nose that he used to tease us. If you don't do this homework, your nose is going to be like mine. Physical characteristics will tell you a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Of course, my niece married to a Ghanaian, and her daughter is quarter Chinese, quarter white, and half, Ghanaian. And my other, like my brother's children are half-half, and then they marry, white. So I mean, in another 50 years, we all look different. Our gene pool have been mixed, right? And so we have to understand this society will not stay still. It will change. So the therapist's cultural identity, if you are not comfortable with who you are, you will hinder psychotherapy. And this is why it is so important. We've got to look at this aspect of ourselves. I have an article, it says, white supremacy, have you heard of that? Privilege.
White privilege.
Yeah. So, have you ever met anybody who feels they are white, they are more superior? I think we do. Yep. So the thing is, they may not be aware of their own privilege. And so we will have to deal with that. And of course, some people, unintentional racism. They did not mean to, but somehow we do. Somehow it's in us. So this is why it depends on the culture in which you were brought up. So what is a therapist's responsibilities? So we need to recognize that everybody is a product of culture. As I mentioned, it does not have to be ethnicity. It could be environment. It could be the economic situation. It could be different way of race. Like some religion, they isolated themselves and their culture would be different. So therefore, we have to acknowledge that we are product of our culture. The other thing when we're talking about transference and counter-transference, sometimes in our head, we understand, yeah, I got to, this kind of trigger something in me, I got to overcome, I got to learn, and I got to deal with, right? And it is unconscious. Part of it, all of a sudden, like you can feel it. You kind of discriminate people against us. But be realistic. Can we eliminate discrimination? I don't think we could ever. Why do I say that? It's not we want to feel superior or we want to have people that like us or we, I don't know. It's inborn, isn't it? You agree? Because when we see people who are different from us, we might just feel differently until we build a relationship. Did I tell you about my buddy at undergrad at U of T, Elizabeth? She's from uranium. She's white. So we team up together. We went to the library together, we studied together, we took the same classes, and we were just twins. They called us the twins. And one day I was ill. I wasn't there. And our friends would say, "Where's your Chinese friend?" And Elizabeth, "What?" She couldn't understand. And then all of a sudden she said, "Oh, you mean Lilian?" With relationship, the color of the skin disappears. Your culture, where you're raised, disappears. And that's why the relationship between client and psychotherapist is so important. It has to have a trusting relationship, and you have to have acceptance, mutual acceptance. In order to do that, we have to do a lot of overcoming. And that's why when we enter into the worlds of our clients, the therapists learn from the client's world. And that is not an easy job. So, very often, that's another one, we often deny that we are bigots because we are not aware of our biases. You see, that's why earlier I said, we need to learn, we need to be aware of our biases. And how do we do that? We need to exercise self-reflection and reflect and examine our own racial identity. Is that fair? And that's what we spend most of our time on. Okay, what is microaggression? You might read and come across this. Now, Stanley Su and company describe microaggression as a brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environment indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, and that communicate hostility, derogatory or negative racial slights or insults towards people who are culturally different from us. So microaggression can happen in daily interaction and social session. Sometimes it's not for any particular reason. It's just part of our everyday. Some are not offended by it. Like so often people say, you're Chinese. That's okay because we have a good relationship, right? We tease each other, right? But it is still discrimination, isn't it?
I think at times we can be so cautious of not offending somebody that we avoid trying to describe that person, we avoid using their skin color, which is the most obvious way of describing that person.
That's right. And so it will be, if you are overly conscious, you'll be so mechanical, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't live the relationship. And you will just kind of formulate the relationship. But in the beginning, I think we had to be cautious. And after a little while, you forget, right? Like Elizabeth forgotten I was Chinese. See, what are the two major blocks or major issues for discrimination? Skin color, language.
So even if you come with a handicap or you're hearing impaired or something that makes you different, that's also a different culture too.
Exactly. I'm glad you bring that up. Accent and disabilities. It's, it requires a lot of us to do a lot of things. What is one of the hardest things for you to overcome in cultural discrimination?
Maybe like the ones that are more innate and maybe come into your automatic thought and then you want to stop yourself.
Yes, automatically.
Yeah.
Well, is it wrong when you see somebody coming in, all of a sudden you assume that they are such and such? When I walk into a Chinese store, what would be the first thing they greet me with? In Chinese. In Chinese have so many dialects. And then they started to go, in Mandarin. And I would say, ni hao. Then they realize that I don't speak Mandarin. Then they'll say, well, what dialect do you speak? Oh, okay. I understand a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Well, why can't we just go in there and say, this is what is the official language? Or languages. English and French. So this is our environment. So therefore, people who come in here and do business, they need to learn our environment too. Isn't that interesting? But does not make me feel less respected. They just want to respect me in case, because of my age. When they speak to little kids, they might be say, well, they don't know Chinese, then they could do it. So this is why, it is very complicated when we talk about cultural self. And the mainstream psychologist believes that, there are hindrances if we are not aware of it. Okay, I think we should go into that. Okay, the two big camp, a big group, is that individualistic, we mentioned that, and collectivistic. Now, research had focused on these two topics, and they say collectivistic is associated with non-Western culture. The individuals encouraged to subject personal goal to group goal. Now that is, how many people understand what collectivistic culture is? You do, right? The Asian society. There are good things, but there are not so good things. For example, what are the good things? Like, they have the value system. When the parents raise the kids using all they have, so that the children have a good future. And what I expected, that when they are established, they will come home and serve the elders, right? And so you see multi-generation living in one house. So you got to look after grandfather, grandmother, and then father and mother. And I remember my husband's father, he was very accomplished. He's got the money, but he had to live in the house, and he will give over. Can you imagine? His salary to his father. Now that's unheard of, right? And okay. But that's the way they were raised, and they would not question it, right? They feel that's meaningful because the parents suffer so much to raise them, give them a good life and everything else they need. And now obviously, when they grow up, I don't know whether they expressively say, you look after me, but somehow the relationship is such that they will respect. So now, if we do that, what would happen to the young people? I don't have money to give back to you, right? And I want my, what do you call it? Nucleus family. I only live with my wife and my children. You are lucky if I meet you and talk to you every week, right? So this is very different, individualistic and collectivistic. Now, which is good? Which is bad? Again, right? The good, there's the downside. The not so good, there is the bright side. And more when I have clients coming in from a collectivistic society, they were so disappointed that the children do not look after them. And they are in a new country, and they need help. In the meantime, there's very few social groups. They feel so isolated. On the other hand, the young people need to compete in their profession, and they need to look after their kids. And some, as we talk about, mixed marriages, if the spouses are from another culture, there's a lot of adjustment, a lot of conflict. So you are the psychotherapist. Where do you stand in that situation? How could you make their lives meaningful and positive experiences? It is very difficult. Okay, when we talk about individuals are encouraged to subject personal goals to the group goal, not only within your family, within your extended family. How about the uncles, the aunts? And that's getting very complicated. And that's not easy. So, but in their view, life satisfaction is derived from carrying their responsibility and maintaining group harmony. What does that mean? That means you have to sacrifice a lot of things that you want to do, a lot of things that you want to have, and a lot of things that you don't want to do, and then you have to do. So how are we going to adjust? And of course, we talk about they were taught to obey parents. It's a good thing, isn't it? Because they are not mature enough. The parents have gone through, the grandparents have gone through, and those are valuable knowledge to pass on to the next generation. I should knock that. That is what we are lacking in our society. The children find their own company with very little guidance, with very little value system or moral system that is instilled. But how can you do it? You're going to get a group together and teach them? Go to church, churches do teach some, and other groups too. But I think the most powerful tool is modeling. How you live, what you say, and who you are. Then you will reproduce the person that you want them to be. Okay, let's talk about self. The self can be construed, framed, or conceptually represented in multiple ways. And in an individualistic society, we have independent. I wanted to find out what my good point is, what my goals are, and it's good. But for The collectivistic society is that you are independent. You depend on others too. So figuratively saying, the independent view of self. Okay, this is all you, everything you want to do. This is a characteristic of you. And mother goes to work and she has her sets of training and that's her work. And there's daddy, and these are different siblings, and these are your friends. So you are kind of, you lead your own way, and everybody appreciate everybody else, and you will find, but I do not have to be in your life. You have a lot of friends. When you move away, do you get letters, phone calls? You're gone, you're gone.
So alone is like that.
Yeah, but thank God for Facebook. We still have students who graduated, email us from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, from Asia, from Europe, right? And we still be connected. But that is just modern, technological age. But for the older folks, they can't even get into it, and that is hard. But the independent view of self, in other words, I am not only independently develop myself, do what I like to do, develop it, good, everybody's happy, I'm proud of you, you are successful. But in terms of emotional support, in terms of helping each other in times of, happiness or sadness, how do we do it? The other day I was just thinking, the only time we got together is go to a funeral. We shouldn't be doing just that. We have so much we could. But as your world grows, and it is hard to keep tab of everybody, and it is good to have people who like you and that. So we cannot be 4,500 friends. We have a few friends. But the view is that, okay, I also depend on you to help me in certain ways. Of course, the positive is you don't feel lonely. Positively, you get support. But negatively, it also drains you too. So therefore, when you have clients come from this perspective, you have to say, well, what will make your life meaningful and happy? How could do you feel this is a little too much? Could you cut a little less? What would you be comfortable with? And it's good for everyone. Okay, consequences of different self-control and task. Okay, you read that? Independent is unique. You could express yourself, realize internal attributes, promote your own goals, be direct, say what's on your mind. Okay? The interdependent, the contrast is you belong, you fit in, you have a place in the group, and you also engage in action. Engagement is important, isn't it? And how many times do we see clients who are isolated, lonely, depressed? And so if you have a group that you depend on, and you could also promote each other's goals, almost like you say, yeah, what do you need? They understand. It's rich, isn't it? But there are also downsides, and we say, okay. Now we talk about the difference in cognition. Does it make sense? The thinking style. Black or white? Logical or not logical? Is the thought clear, not clear? Concrete. But the Chinese yin-yang thinking is that, yeah, this is what we were talking about. One negative, there's also, yeah, the positive. And there are different shades of gray. That's getting very popular book, right? And our thinking, our brain is very complex. It's not just linear, black or white. And we need to understand how the brain works. And how do we handle contradictions, ambiguity? Isn't that the thing that we always face with clients? Very ambiguous. It could be this and it could be that, and I don't really know what. You know, that was very difficult. And of course you have some very philosophical individuals. And if you're not philosophical, and that's the same, where does she come from on this, right? So when we talk about cultural differences, we talk about individual differences as well. And your own culture is different from another culture. Is that a possible job to be relating to another person? That is not easy. I'm not going to talk about John Barry's. I studied his course, and he's talking about, you know, how many ways you can acculturate. In other words, you could be completely integrated. Give me an example of completely integrated into a majority culture. Let's talk about, you know, if you are from another culture and you go into a majority culture, you have choices. Some would completely immerse in the majority culture. Forget about the culture they were brought in. They don't speak the language. They don't want to remember what they learned in their own culture. They want to immerse into this majority culture. The upside is you survive and you get jobs and you feel part of the majority culture. But on the other hand, you have forgotten the good things from your own culture, right? You abandon the things that you were brought up that are good. So our majority culture, if you don't share, will be deprived of the good things that you can bring from your culture. So this is why so often when I'm working with cross-cultural clients, and I said, you know what? You have good things from your culture that we wanted to instill in our culture. And all of the majority culture characteristics are not all good. You should bring the good culture into this majority culture and don't pick up the bad things from this culture. Then your life, your world will be different, and you will influence the majority culture for the better. They say, oh, you know, they think that once you get into another culture, and you should forget about your own culture. For example, hardworking, respect parents, caring the old, you know, for the older folks, and not just wanted to get higher up in your profession. So, you know, living a good life is a balancing act, isn't it? But we're not just balancing one thing, we're balancing so many things. And it is not easy to. Okay, some of them, when John Barry talked about, is separation and segregation. Some people, you know, I know in some areas even now, they say, we don't need to learn English. In B.Sc and Toronto too. Well, we have, you know, grocery stores, we have laundry stores, we have, you know, teachers, and we have churches. We don't need any English, you see. And, well, we feel good about ourselves. Let's do that. So if they do not take a little bit from the majority culture, they stay in their own culture, they become separated, isolated. And that's not always a good thing. But sometimes assimilation. I take a little bit of the major culture, I retain my culture. Or somebody said, I do not like to live here because they don't respect who I am, where I'm coming from, and I don't like this culture. Everything is so, yuck, and I don't like it. What happens if the person takes that stand? You are marginalized. We have seen that. So in other words, when different culture comes into a majority culture, a person has, or a family has a choice. We're not talking about individuals. We talk about the family. There were families that come in and say, well, okay, we'll buy a house near the area that we feel comfortable with. We talked about pockets of different culture. Yeah, I think it is okay overall. You look at Canada, we are not a melting pot like we used to say about the US. We are what? A mosaic. What does that mean? A mosaic means that pieces put together. And I think it's all right, isn't it? Because different cultures bring in different things, and we respect, we have different food, different languages. Our culture would be richer. Is it being too optimistic? Okay, then how do we cope with the differences? Oops, what did I do? Technology. Okay, I'm going to do just 2 more slides and we will take a break. Then we'll talk about self-disclosure. Is that okay? Okay, how do you cope with the differences? I'm sure Catherine could tell us a little bit. Does that make sense?
This is also true of First Nations.
Yes, that's right. We were talking about Asian and we're talking about First Nations. You're right. When I was a psychoeducational consultant for a school board, and I used to go to the reserve, and I have a buddy. She's white, and you know what? They would accept me to do testing, to work in groups, and to talk with parents, and do assessment and intervention for all their learning difficulties. And one day they said to me, "We want you to be here. We don't want her." I mean, it's a big reserve, right? We have to have 2 consultants. And one person said to me, "What does a white woman know about us?" Well, I am not First Nation, but because I guess my face color is closer. You see, when you are in isolation, you have a set of rules, and you feel uncomfortable with people who are different, and also who's going to teach you how to live. I think that is something you need to overcome. And I mean, it is not easy, and they have their own system. But gradually, we are getting into it, and then we move their school. Children, when they finish a certain level, we bring them to our own mainline schools. And it worked out really well. But it takes time. It takes time. Okay. We still have to deal with, we're talking about not just an ethnicity as cross-cultural, but even location. And we need to look at how do we share? How do we, solve problems? And sometimes we are what we always say, we're made of the same stuff, right? We are what? Cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual being. It doesn't matter from what countries, from what culture, coming into a majority culture, we still have to work through within our family, within our school, within our largest society. And that's why it is a big topic. So we're not going to work on that one. And you have the notes. Okay, let's take 10 minutes, okay, for a break. Then we'll go into self-disclosure. Are there any questions before we leave? Does it make sense? It's such a short time to cram so much into it. So if you are interested in this, there are references, and read it up. It's very interesting. Conversations, and this is my privilege to meet with you and interact with you, because you are, experienced people, and you've been in the field, some of you longer than I have, and so you have cases, and it was just so good to hear. So just the afternoon roundtable discussion, I think you will bring up some of the cases that you had success with. Some of the cases, now you're still bothering you. And so that we can share, I think that is very important. And that's what the function of the group is. Now, when we're talking about the collectivistic, individualistic society, in the characteristic of self-disclosure, there's also a difference. Collectivistic people do not like to disclose intimate feelings to a psychotherapist. It's hard to get them to talk about how they feel, how about the family. Why? Because they have been brought up, they have been raised, and they have lived within their community, and they share among themselves. And they feel ashamed that they have to go to a psychologist, a psychotherapist, or a counselor. So when they come, they just want to give you what is the tip of the iceberg. This is my problem. Help me solve it. But yes, we will help you solve it, but we need to understand the circumstances and the context of where the problem appears, right? And how the problem came into being. So it is hard for them to talk about it. And especially hard for them to go to a psychiatrist. A doctor is okay. So how do you overcome that? How would you overcome someone who's resistant to get mental health assistance?
Build up a relationship with them.
All right. Build up a relationship. Without a relationship, there's nothing. Sometimes they don't want a relationship because they are drawn to you, then they might reveal something that they wanted to hide. See, a lot of people have so much to hide. So do we. Remember last time we talked about we are entitled to our own privacy, even as psychotherapists, right? So we got to respect them, they could. But when some of the issues that they have affect the quality of life, affects what the problem, involved in the problem they brought up, then we will have to be tenderly, skillfully, strategically get around so that they don't feel that they were, open up too much. Sometimes they open up, they preserve themselves, they protect themselves, but sometimes it's protect others, especially family members. So you got to understand where they are coming from and to overcome. I think lately, mental health had not been blacklisted, right? There are more publicity about mental health. It's just as bad as having a fever or, having an ulcer in your stomach or something like that. They legitimatize it and they said it's not something that is bad about you. We see our ego is very important, isn't it? Anything that intrudes our ego, we need to protect the ego. But now I think more and more recognize that it is a disability, and what do we call it? Invisible disability, isn't it? And I know if you have a wheelchair, because of Paul's knees, and this time when we go to Chicago, and we order a wheelchair, and people will help you with the wheelchair. But if you have depression, people stay away from you. Even though your depression is very legit, from where you're coming from, and in your body or hormones or whatever caused it. You see, so invisible disabilities, we got to recognize and we got to say it's okay. But do we have people well trained to help people with invisible disabilities? And we were just talking about, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to learn how to use themselves effectively as a tool for psychotherapy to help clients. All right, now we talk about self-disclosure. When do we use self-disclosure? How do we use it effectively? How does self-disclosure affect us? Because we are private human beings too. And what is appropriate? When I disclose something, is it going to hurt me? How many of you have disclosed to your clients and afterwards you spend more time thinking about what you have disclosed? What does the client received? And what does the client feel about me now? And how am I going to take it back? And you might have regrets. And you might wish, but why did I say it at the time? Did I do it because of my impulse? Or did I do it because I care? Did I do it because it triggers something unconscious? Like what we're talking about, the triggers in our unconscious mind? What was it? So we go back and we regurgitate. How many of you have done that? Yeah. So then your conclusion is, from now on I'm not going to disclose because it hurt me, right? So I think it's so important. Self-disclosure is a very powerful tool if you do it appropriately at the right time and the right amount, and realizing this is for your client and it is not for me. But when you're doing that and it does trigger something inside you, and that is time to find your peer supervision or your supervisor or your mentor. Because you need to learn when, how much, and, for the benefit of the client in self-disclosure. And usually it addresses tension or mistrust because of cultural differences. So it's okay to say, you know what, in my culture, this is what I do, but teach me about how you will deal with this problem in your culture. In other words, you acknowledge of your, inadequacy in that area. And we, as we said last time, right, we learn from clients. Not just clients benefit from us, but we learn from our clients. So we have to be transparent, and we have to be honest, and we have to be authentic, right? And he said, you know what? When we're talking about a couple of cases during the break, we're going to share those in our group discussion. But, sometimes it's against your culture. It's against your value system. How do we deal with that? But it was perfectly okay in their culture. Are we compromising? Should we compromise? What are our worldview when they are here? We don't want, say for example, a husband abused the wife had the right. Now, how are we going to instill that? It's almost psychoeducational, right? And this is why when we're talking about meaning-centered counseling, it is actually psychoeducational. You educate and you help them so that they build meaningful and discover their own way of building their lives together. And also, when you are disclosing and they feel, she really wants to understand me. Oh my goodness, she is sensitive to how I feel. So sensitivity is very important. And also, some people, I don't know, that we could talk about that this afternoon. Should you tell your client your qualifications? How much do you want to tell your clients qualifications? If you talk about blah, 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 you kind of intimidate, right? There is a possibility to intimidate, so they be careful what they say because you're so knowledgeable, they're so powerful, you're so famous, you've got to do this and that, right? You never know what the client's saying, right? But then if you don't, they will say, I need to know, how can you help me if you don't have that kind of training? So how much should we disclose? That is something that, tell us about your experiences, your successes and your not so successful, okay? And indiscriminate self-disclosure is definitely unhelpful. Now, what do we mean by indiscriminate self?
We talk more about yourself.
We talk about ourselves. All of a sudden, you see, what happened is, if you are practicing, I shouldn't do that, generalizing it, but I mean, if you have seen clients, 7 clients a day, 5 days a week, and you don't get supervision, I mean, the last one, maybe Friday at 3 p.m., you just burst out, you want to talk to someone, and here's a client who's very good listener. And I mean, then it triggers that you say, that's weak. That's very indiscriminate, right? You're not thinking about the client's need because you're so tired, you're loaded, and you've got so much you want to share. All of a sudden you say, this weekend I'm going to... No, that's not very helpful. Right? And do we small talk? I think North Americans like small talk, don't we? Look at, you just...
All of us.
No.
Thank you.
Because when you watch TV, I mean, how many shows are just small talk, as if the 24 hours is just, nothing to do, just sit there, right? Goodness. I'm not going to make a channel when you turn it on in 24 hours, and regurgitate everything. You seem so bored. I think we were educating the young people with iPad, iPhone, and TV, and they just not having discipline. I think we need to regulate ourselves, and we need to have good discipline. It doesn't matter what day of the week, what time of the day, and if you need help, go to your supervisor, your mentor, your peers. And so be clear of your role as a psychotherapist with your client, so that your disclosure would be for the benefit of the client. And self-disclosure in cross-cultural is very effective, because it'll help you build the relationship with your client. We talk about alliance. That is a key tools to get into the world of your client. And especially when they are racially different, culturally different. And self-disclosure is a positive thing, because that means that you are willing to take risk. When they come into you, they risk, because they don't know you from, and you are there just as a professional. But in order to share my life with you, I need to know a little bit about your life too. And especially when it is essential to understand the difficulties this person has experienced. So we psychotherapists will take a risk. And when you take risk, you are vulnerable, right? Hey, you're not better than I am, right? But in doing with these issues, they respect you rather than disrespecting you, because you have a bond. The client, and therapist, there is a bond, because they will talk to you about things that they will never talk to anybody else, including their partners. So this is why we need to respect the materials that they give to us. And this is why we talk about confidentiality, and so that you earn their trust. But some people have more trusting ability than others. So they were testing you. They would ask you questions. What about you? So you have to be very honest. He said, yes, I do have those experiences, but it's not relevant at this time for this. But I tell you something that I I have some experience. So I think we all have, to share and say, well, how did you get out of that situation? I think that is very important. And also disclosure demonstrates the therapist's sensitivity and knowledge of their culture. Now, can we learn all the cultures? No, but you could ask them a little bit. And even within a culture, there is an intra-cultural differences, right? And then to complicate that, you have an individual differences into intracultural differences and intercultural differences, and then there are two human beings from all that kind of background together to share. And that is a miracle, isn't it? So this is why we train psychotherapists. What is the shortcut to get to know them? It is building a relationship. What conditions necessitate therapist self-disclosure in the situation? That's what you think about and say, if I share this, now you, of course, when you see a client, your mind works a mile a minute, right? So you look at, when you talk about insight, you look at it and say, okay, does this disclosure will help or not helping? I'm taking the client's time for this, okay? And like what issues would this client appreciate or value the therapist's disclosure? Would they, like by that time you should know a little bit about the client. The only thing is, if you do that, some clients are so verbal and they become your counselor. Now, is that a good thing? Maybe it is. But that will give you some insight how much your client know about the issue, right? So that is kind of sharing.
They're giving you advice back.
That's right. But you got to be in charge and say, yeah, that's very good. But before we do that, now you were talking about such and such. It is always important to remember you are there for the client. And you could thank them and say, hey, I never thought of that. Thank you. Now, let's back to what we do. So always get back on track. And what does a therapist hope to achieve by self-disclosing? And that is very important. What is the purpose of doing that?
So I know with myself, a young married couple comes in for marriage counseling. They look at me, okay, my kids are all grown up, what do you know about modern day marriage? Or raising a family? Okay, I got a 5-year-old and 3-year-old. I've also leveled the playing field. Now, I'm not talking about book knowledge, I'm not talking about a previous generation. I'm talking about here and now, and that levels the field. And that was, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about, because he's there.
So you are sharing.
Shared enough to know that I'm on the same plane,
Yeah.
and I'm going through what you're going through with your family. So now it's like commonality is, I got a voice.
So the client will say, now you understand how I feel, right? And you had to make it short, right?
But that even works with somebody coming in working with the children's aid. I've been through all that. So okay, I could tell them, okay, this is what you're asking for, this is what you need, this is what you have to do. Gotta make sure you have this, ask them for this, because this is what they are having in their files. This is what you need to. So I educate them on the questions you need to deal with.
So we are psychoeducational consultants.
Mm-hmm.
Any other? Before we start the APA guidelines, it's all in your book, and just highlight a few. See, psychologists are encouraged to recognize that as cultural beings, we may hold attitudes and beliefs that can detrimentally influence our perception and the interaction with individuals who are ethnically and racially different from ourselves. So APA, we have hundreds of thousands of members. And this year we're going to be in Denver, Colorado, August the 4th, I think. Yeah, the first weekend of August. And it would be a good idea to register and join. All right. And the psychologists are encouraged to recognize the importance of multicultural sensitivity, responsiveness, knowledge, understanding about ethnically, racially different individuals. We emphasize that. So it's not just us, it is required by APA. And psychologists strive to apply culturally appropriate skills in clinical and other applied psychological practices. In other words, when you registered as a psychotherapist, psychologist, and you must know multicultural principles. What are the strategies? Is it increase your cultural awareness and knowledge? And this is why we give you articles to read, and also to commit an ongoing cultural self-exploration. And this is what the exercises that we do. Because even at different stages of life, your cultural sensitivity and cultural environment changes. And so you have to continue to say, why do I feel? You know, sometimes I still feel like I'm a kid, but I'm not a kid. And so that, and you have to start to learn how to be appropriate culturally. And develop effort and practice to change automatic positive in-group and out-group perceptions. What does that mean? Do you have an in-group? Yeah. Do you feel more comfortable with your own cultural group? We all do, don't we? Do we have the right to be with our in-group? We do. We need them. But also we could be incorporating the people from the outside too. And I find that this is very good with the meetup. You know, people just come in from all backgrounds. In our meetup, we have Jewish, we have Buddhists, we have atheists, we have Christians, we have, you know, Catholics, we have everything. So this is why you have to start in thinking about groups. And identity and challenge internalized area of power, privilege, and oppression. I think this is all our attitude, isn't it? We need to identify. I think that is identify. Okay, that's a typo. And increase the contact with culturally diverse individuals and social status. I find it is very difficult. As academic, you have the academic, society, academic group, and then sometimes when you go into the inner city and you kind of have a bit of a culture shock, and I'm sure we all have, finding it very different. And how many people they are living in the West Side? Okay, we talk about West Side, academic and all this. And when they go to work in the East Side, all of a sudden they're shocked. These people have no clothes, no food, and it is so hard. I remember the first time when I just got my job and as a psychoeducational consultant, and I had an inner city school. And I'm supposed to do assessment and diagnose them and place them in, different programs. When I saw the kids, a little boy in grade 1 and said, "Oh, have you had your breakfast?" "No, I just woke my mother up." The mother had an addiction problem. Before the child went to school, he had to wake the mother up. "Did you have any breakfast?" "No." Okay, that's an inner city school. I talked to the principal. I find from different classes. He was not the only one. So I said to David, the principal, why don't we set up some breakfast for these kids? Without fuel, you cannot expect them to pay attention in class. You do not expect them to do the work. Let's set it all up. So we did. We set up breakfast. Even the director of education came one day. He was flipping pancakes. And then we started to collecting clothing and put it in the attic so that the kids, like socializing, you smell, you don't have nice clothes, and your parents are not helping you. We set up a shower. So that became the new culture for that school. And it's still going on. You see, all you need is you see the need of the child and you know what they were deprived of, and you could take actions. And it is so important that we commit ourselves, to say, okay, how can we help? And the other strategy that APA suggested is to challenge the us and them into we. How often I say we're made of the same substance, right? The different colors are different, practices, a different environment, even different height. We are made of the same stuff. We have the same emotions. we also have, of course, we modified because how we were brought up, but we really need to say it's not us and them. Even though you were from the same culture, you still have that kind of boundary. I remember when, when I see so many people coming in, from China, the first reaction is, oh, there are more of them. Lilian, they are not them, they are us, right? It is so hard, because this is natural, we have to accept that. We do have, because you see, when I don't look at myself, I'm like everybody else, except other people point at me that you are different from me, right? And then expands your cultural horizons. How do you do that? You read textbooks, and also you watch foreign movies. My husband, I guess he subscribed to whatever it was, so he could watch Korean movies with subtitles, so you get to know, the culture. And there are also ancient Chinese films. I guess they are free. So they learn a little bit about the ancient Chinese culture, right? So that's why sensitize yourself with other culture and learn from it too. So it's, of course, if you can, you travel. I still just savoring my travel to Moscow. I thought, we talk about Russia. When you get to Moscow, they treat you so well, and they have 5-star hotels, and they have all these goodies, and they give you the best thing, everything, and they make your life good. And you go into Red Square, and you look at all the ornate, the gold pagoda, or whatever they call it, and then you go into the Kremlin, and you see the yards, they're just like ours, right? So by doing that, I have a lot of Russian friends, and they also fighting against poverty, against discrimination, against war, against everything. We are, if we don't connect, it has to be relationship. It's amazing. And one of the people who invited us and guided us actually took us to the airport early in the morning at 5 o'clock. She visited Washington, D.C., and she got all excited, and it was just amazing. They also are curious about our culture too. So I think, we really need to be sensitive to all the cultural differences. And also strategies to develop multicultural competence skills, unpack your invisible, unacknowledged area of privilege. I begin to think that way now. I thank God that I still have money to buy the food that I like, to have my stomach filled. It is really privilege, isn't it? And our children are very privileged. They got environment, they got, opportunity to study, and they develop their skills. How many children, how many young people, how many adults, they have the talents never discovered. And not only they were deprived, our society deprived too. But we're talking in broad terms. And we have our limitations, but it is good attitude to have. And conduct a critical power differential analysis. Yeah, we already analyze ourselves a lot, don't we? Yeah, and also we talk about, how do we model and how do we evaluate our skills, and also how do we do assessment? And especially people who have to do a diagnosis. And I find it was very difficult because the legislation say you must have this number of IQ in order to be da-da-da-da-da. But then people from different cultures, you cannot develop the intelligence score based on the North American norms and using North American culturally appropriate developed assessment tools. So this is the thing that we really need to pay attention to. And now they say complete genograms and cultural genograms, both kinds. And have you ever, you know what a genogram is? Have you ever done one? Do you discover yourself by going through that? Okay, and also find training. This is the training ground that we have on cultural competence. And also, remember, we talk about ethnocultural transference and counter-transference. Like when we're talking to everybody, your transference will trigger something in the back of your mind subconsciously, and then you react inappropriately. Or the client, projects something on you, like Freud, and then he would, overact and then react negatively or unprofitably. So this is why we've got to be ethno. In other words, in culture, we also have the same transformation and chain influences. And develop cross-cultural communication skills. That's a biggie. Any insight on that? How do you develop cross-cultural? Yes, Nellie?
The words we use, like instead of the jargon. Trying to see what language they use and then using that in terms of like explaining things or even in stuff.
Do you have a form?
Language?
Yeah. Do you have a checklist or something?
No.
Do people like to use checklists? Is that a hindrance or is that...
Checklist for what it...
Yeah, about, like the cultural differences. That would be something you can develop. Don't you think that would be useful? That would be a good research, wouldn't it? Not offensive, and not in a sense that will kind of, probe into something. That might be an interesting thing, isn't it, when we are talking about the differences? Because we never realize how minute differences can trigger negative interaction. Because you don't know that person, that might be a trigger. Well, for the more senior population, maybe age is a trigger. I don't want to tell you how old I am, right? Because that means in North America, if you're old, you're useless, right? You have run out of youthfulness, right? But in China, age is golden. You could tell people, I am such and such, you got to respect me. You see the differences? So it's minute, but it does make a difference in their culture. And they all respect older folks. You see, whatever you say, it's wisdom. Here, whatever old folks say, you don't understand. You're outdated. You're not my generation, right? So,
I think the media contributes a lot to that.
big time, isn't it? Yeah. So we worship youthfulness. Of course, youth is a time that you have the best energy, best creativity, but can we not develop that in other generations too? Why limit our brains? Now the brain science was saying we create brain cells, making new connections. We might be using different part of the brain, but it will still be alive. Isn't that good news? So that's why we have to keep up with this research and critically examine Western-based psychological paradigms for their relevance to cross-cultural diverse individuals, family, groups, and communities. That's a tall order, isn't it? But at least we're in the right path. At least this biggest psychological association recognizes. And then we talk about acknowledge acculturation, like what John Barry's talking about, the language, biculturation, spirituality. Now that we never talked about before, right? Religion, and out of it, it's your own. But now spirituality has come to the fore. And racism, we address it. We talk about it, not hiding it. And oppression, discrimination, is a very important variable in the treatment of very diverse clients. And also, along with that, you've got to expand your psychological intervention. How do we deal with it? That is where the rubber hits the road. When I go home, how am I going to live? How do I say to people who abuse me? How much could I gradually, how much change is profitable or get worse? So this is the thing that we need to be cautious and work to enhance cultural awareness and skills as you associate with your organization. In other words, we're not just doing it for ourselves. We're doing it to make our community better, and in turn. So that's all the slides that I have. Okay, this afternoon Paul's going to have a lecture, and all right, I guess we should close this, right? Yeah, okay, I'll just turn this off so that we can have a, yeah. Oh, the heat's gone. Okay, what do you think of the cultural self? Do you know your cultural self? And what self-disclosure is so powerful. What do we need to learn? And how do we do it? So 12 o'clock will be lunch, and we'll come back here and, according to the schedule, research and report the work in progress. And it's very intense. Usually we start at 8 o'clock in the morning and finish. Consensus of psychologists is that not one single therapeutic model can be effective for all cases and for all people. So therefore, the only answer to deliver effective therapy is to take a holistic approach so that the therapist can select the appropriate modalities so that they can most suitable for that particular client or particular case. So meaning-centered approach is a good candidate for this pluralistic approach for a few reasons. For example, meaning-centered approach is based on the humanistic existential approach, which is a common factor for all therapeutic, different modes of therapy, and that emphasize the therapeutic relationship and the quality of the therapist. Secondly, meaning is a core for all experiences and in all aspects of human existence. And also, I think meaning therapy gives a framework so that you will integrate all the other modalities so that we could have, we talk about eclectic approach. That means that the therapist will pull a little bit of this and pull a little bit of that. And so sometimes you get lost and you say, well, okay, would that work or this work? So the meaning approach will give you a framework, and we just deal with the common core of human problems, existential anxiety, self-esteem, and person-centered. That's my introduction for that one. And how many were from a psychology background? I know some of you are social, both social work and psychology. And you will remember the first wave is psychodynamics, started since Freud, right? And then there are more people doing research and realize that we cannot be effective just based on the psychodynamic approach. Psychoanalytic doesn't have areas that we cannot reach. So we have, well, Skinner and Wolpe started with the behavioral therapy, cognitive therapy back in Albert Ellis, and that formed the second force of the psychotherapy. Then you have the humanistic existential, Roger Rolomé, Viktor Frankl, and Wong. And so I think we talked about that yesterday a little bit. Then, of course, Stanley Su and his brother Daryl Su, and also Paul Peterson, that used to be from University of Hawaii. And they started the cross-cultural force. That will be the fourth, I don't know what they talk about, the force, but I mean, it's just a different approaches. And now a lot of people talking about is the integrative meaning therapy. So that will be Paul's baby. Now, what are the, well, Paul did mention a little bit yesterday about the contribution of existential therapy, and that we recognize the human condition. We talk about share the client in a common humanity. You heard me talking about we are made of the same stuff, and therefore we can help each other. And they recognize the dignity and intrinsic value of the client. CBT, I'm sure they do, but they're not expressively, dealing with the client just like us, and we value them, and also help the client to understand the assumption about the world and life. And we talk a lot about that today. Okay, the major themes of existential therapy is to address existential anxiety, confront the dark side of human existence, and we talk about, we can have freedom, we can, we have more power to help ourselves to say, yes, I can do certain things. And it's an empowerment. Then we have the courage to live an authentic and meaningful life. So, so how can we use the existential therapy in perspective for using self? We deepen the therapeutic alliance because we share with our, whoops, sorry about that. By sharing and by being with a client, we talk about self-disclosure that actually increased in intimacy and authenticity of that relationship. Okay, I think I'm going to just move because it's impossible to cover the whole thing. You have the materials, you could read about that. This is something I have emphasized, is that you focus on the here and now, and not just giving them intervention. Let them understand where they are coming from, and so do something. But it is the face-to-face. This is why I always object. What do they call it? Online counseling?
Yes, correct. Online,
yeah. What do you think of online counseling, online therapy? I think we have well, we need to use our technology. But technology doesn't cover everything, does it? We just talked a little earlier, right? When people were eating at the table, they don't communicate, they don't talk to each other, they use the cell phone, right? They text one another. And what do you think of the therapy? Through email, through
I think
Skype?
the emotions missing, like it's hard because the emotions and non-verbal is missing, but at the same time, I feel like it's a useful tool for people who are, quite far, don't have access to services and stuff like that. So it could be a useful tool.
Exactly. And that we were talking about usefulness, but also limitations.
So I took 2 courses from one university about online counseling, and they say if you're doing it effectively, you gotta almost put in the emotions by saying, okay, if you're in my office, I would reach out my hand, I'll bring you in, I will give you some coffee. You'd be a narrative besides just giving the words.
Is that a good substitute?
They were saying that the research said that the results of online versus in person, the results are basically almost the same. There wasn't that much difference between the two.
So in other words, our mindset will be different, wouldn't it? We will probably acquire more skills to translate our nonverbal behavior, our emotions, and our feelings through cyberspace.
One of the arguments they were saying with online is, if you've got a client in your office, they've got to remember what you said in that 1 hour. When it's online, if you go back and look after the emails, the text messages, they have time to go over and over where they can think more clearly what's happened.
So in other words, that is the advantage. They have the record of it.
Yeah.
Is that safe?
Well, you have to make sure that they know what's at that end, and there's also online sites where it's all just encrypted, where it can't be hacked into.
But I think our generation at this moment is in transition. We are not as skilled as the younger generation who communicate everything effectively through media. And we are still struggling. Some people can't even use email, but they have to, right? We are doing texting, we're doing emails, and we are doing FaceTime, we are doing Skype, right? So there are a lot more technology that we can use.
Sorry, so just your email, this is my email and text messages?
Oh, not really text messages, but more email. And you can go into certain sites that are where you have live web, but there is security programs out there where the messages are encrypted back and forth, where it's not like, so there's securities in place.
Yes.
But
Yes.
say the results that they were showing, face-to-face versus online, the results are basically the same. There's not that big discrepancy.
You never know, right? And I remember I was asked last year to teach a course because they said, well, in another province, in another university. And I said to them, and I said, well, I don't feel comfortable without actually talking to the individuals. They asked me to go to the university, but I couldn't travel at that particular time. I said, okay, let's try, but we will have the reading part. You have to read ahead of time. You have to do your homework, and then we will email back and forth, but we also have FaceTime, Skype. And at the end, the evaluation from my students in Alberta, and they said, the best part was that we can share, we can talk, and that was the best part. But we're in transition, obviously. When the younger generation, we find that was perfect any way you can. But I find that was important. And I am going to try. You see, this is why you see that Paul's tape was glitched, so many glitches. Well, because someone came to us and said we could do that online. We could tape it, and we could do that, to put it together. And I still did not feel comfortable with it, but we said we tried. But the product was so poor that we said, I'm sorry, we can't do that. But eventually, who knows, right? I still believe that here and now, solid relationship between therapist and client is very powerful. It's very powerful. Whatever technology you may use to translate that, all power to you. What is meaning therapy? So meaning therapy actually is grow out of Viktor Frankl's logotherapy and Yalom's existential therapy. And the meaning therapy actually emphasized on integration and meaning research. And it is evidence-based, integrative, spiritual, positive, relational, and cross-cultural. So it's very broad and it's very comprehensive. And today I just want to give you just an outline what is the meaning of meaning, right? And how do you define meaning? And also, if you subscribe to the meaning approach, what are the interventions that you have tried that is useful? I thought I could just share a little bit of that. And we will be doing some course training, so if you're interested, and you could. The motto of meaning therapy is, meaning is all we have. Because whatever we do, there is meaning behind it. Why am I so angry and hit out? There is a meaning behind what I do. All actions, there is a meaning behind it. Then how do we effectively help other human beings? It's through relationship. So, as we talked about earlier, in order to be effective in psychotherapy, you must be able to enter into the private world of your client, and whichever way you can. And the world of meaning is very common. People share, okay? And I can move that. And you can read that part. Okay, so meaning therapy is holistic and integrative, and it's just like person-centered, but it's going beyond that. And let's just move on here. Now, Amy Van Dersen from England, and she talked about the 4 dimensions of life, and we talk about that too. We talk about there is a spiritual, personal, social, and physical world. And we live in this complex world. And that's what I always say, you know, we're making of the same stuff. We have cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual. Yeah. Okay. So meaning therapy is trying to incorporate all the different parts of us in our different world. And of course, to be effective use of self, we talked about how many self this morning, right? With so many different self. And this is the picture that Paul had conceptualized and put together. And I think very interesting. We have experiencing self and observing spiritual, executive, narrative, unconscious, and habitual. And it's very complicated. We don't have time to go through this. Now, for example, executive self, you are organizing and you're making decisions. Then you have all these experiences and you're looking and when we talk about distancing and through mindfulness and you're observing yourself, and that also gives you the experience. Of course, we have the spiritual conditioning practice and the transference and dependence. And also, I mean, our lives is so complex. And you try to draw a picture of life, and that's what it looks like, as simple as we could possibly make it. Okay, now these are if you say, well, what are these selves? Okay, we have slides and you could read over. Okay, I don't have time for that one. So, yeah, what is the, that we'll have to get into a lot more discussion than just going through this. All right, let's move on to something okay, let's talk about cross-culture because we're talking about the cultural self. Yeah, they're all in your handout. I'm just skipping them. Okay, culture has a pervasive influence on people's behavior, attitude, and value. That's what we talked about this morning. And we cannot understand the client's private meanings without knowing their cultural background. So we are not doing it because we are nosy, because we do want to understand their behavior, what's the meaning behind that, and that has a lot to do with how they were raised, in what context they lived in, and also the sensitivity to personal struggle in combating discrimination is essential. In other words, we have to develop a common ground that we can share and we can build up. All right, this is what I wanted to talk about. So often when we started the meaning therapy, now there's no questions everywhere else to talk about meaning therapy. Before, most of them, we have a chapter in one of our books and say, what is the meaning of meaning? Okay, yeah. What is meaningful life for you? What is a meaningful life for you? Have you ever thought of that? What is meaningful life for you? Carl?
I guess this means that you live to your full potential, meaning that you become your best self. I mean, you actually aspire to live your life to accomplish your goals, your dreams that you desire.
So you actualize yourself,
Right.
and you live meaningfully.
Right.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that? What is meaningful life for you? Bonnie.
I love that quote, to love and be loved is really all you need in life.
All right.
To love and be loved.
To love and be loved.
I don't know who did anybody heard that quote? I'm going to look up and see who did it.
It's become part of you now, right, Bonnie?
Yeah.
Yep. You incorporate that sense of love and be loved, and that's meaningful for you. Right. Anybody want to share? Okay. Pause and thought about, sometimes the word is so abstract. What is the meaning of meaning, right? So with Paul's experience and what he had worked through, well, I guess a lot of you don't know, he's the ordained minister by AGC. What was that? What did AGC?
Associated Gospel.
Associated Gospel of Churches, yeah. So his first occupation is a pastor. And he actually is the founding pastor of the Chinese Gospel Church on Dundas and Huron. But then he said, I'm too impatient. I can't be a good pastor. So I'm always interested in psychology. So my life meaningful is to learn more about psychology and to develop in the field of psychology. So with his background, with the spiritual training and his personal experiences and his knowledge, and he put together. And so in his mind, the model for meaning is pure. P-U-R-E. What do they represent? So these are the 4 ingredients of meaning. And P is purpose, as Carl said, the goal. You must have goals. With goals, you must have directions, and you pursue what matters to you. So that's pure. And U is understanding. You have a sense of, you understand who you are, and all right, to understand your situation, to understand other people, and to understand yourself. So that is part of how you construct meaning in your life. It's understanding the condition where you are here now, and also what was past and the circumstances where you started to think about your life. Okay. R is responsible action. You have to decide to do the right thing, assuming responsibility for your consequences. And that is very important. And E is enjoying meaningful living, as a sense of purpose, significance, and happiness. So now, E could also for evaluation, right? If you have developed meaningful life, you enjoy what you got. But then if you don't, then you could evaluate and say, what did go wrong? Do I not understanding the circumstances well enough? Am I not taking responsible actions? So that E could also be. And I find that meaning approach to therapy, it's not just for adults, intellectuals, for kids. I had a 7-year-old, and she was precocious. And one time, and she just said to me, I just have, I don't know whether I mentioned to you or not. She said, I know I cannot change my daddy. And this was after 4 sessions or so. And I cannot change my mommy, but I think I could change myself. And I really understand that, sometimes I don't know what to do, but I remember I must do the right thing. That really floored me. A 7-year-old living in an adult world, talking like an adult, but they do understand. So after that, and I tried teenagers, and they do understand, and they wanted to do the right thing. And it's almost like ingrained in their mind. It doesn't matter what circumstances I am in. I know I have no ability to change circumstances. I know my limitations, but I know my responsibility is to do the right thing. Now, for a young child, what do they know about the right thing? Or say, what is right, what is wrong? That's so difficult. But they innately have a sense of what is right. That is abstract, right? But that is meaning. And where do they get that meaning? We believe that it's innate. Are we wrong? I think basically we have a conscience. Somehow inside us, we know the behavior is right or the behavior is wrong. But sometimes there's a gray area, right? Sometimes not absolutely right or absolutely wrong, or depending on the circumstances. So when clients come into therapy, we have to let them know. You say, what is your goal? What is your meaning of life? And what does the society demand of you? You're not just thinking about yourself, you're thinking about above yourself, beyond yourself, beyond your family, beyond your community. I think if we all practice this, I think our society will get better. Okay, we talk about purpose and, okay, of course when you talk about purpose, you talk about here and now, you talk about the future, right? So this is, I think we could read that. And what does it serve? We could do that. You could read that. Understanding. Okay. Do you understand yourself? What are you good at? What is your place in the world? And what is the pressing need of you in this particular situation at this particular time? And here it says, don't be a stranger to oneself and dare to open the dark rooms and the secret chambers in one's life. And this morning's exercise is practically doing that, right? Yeah, what are the things that we want to hide? I think timing is very important, isn't it? Sometimes it is important that you do not open up because it's not going to serve you any good purpose, and it's not going to share others. And this is something about in psychotherapy. We were talking about triggers. Talk about transference and countertransference. So often when we see a client, when the situation such and such, you just have the urge to say something. How do you manage that little, from the unconscious bubbling up? How do you do that? So you say, well, what is the goal of this session? What is my goal for my clients? Does it serve a purpose? And how much? This is the thing. Your time at that time is not yours. It's a client's. How much of that time you want to spend to talk about yourself because you have the need to talk about yourself. Now, are we entitled to have our needs met during that time? Are we entitled to, I have a need right now, I wanted to share with my clients, and, it triggers. Do we have, am I entitled to spend some time?
No,
Why not?
because you're not being helpful to the client.
But it will be helpful for me.
Then you might be in the wrong profession.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sure you have experienced moments like those. How do you manage it?
I think you have to keep in check that the purpose of your session is not for you as a therapist. It's for the client to make yourself, it's their time, not yours. So you kind of have to thinking if it's going to be beneficial to the client, maybe to share this at this point in time. Am I sharing because it's going to help the client, or do I just kind of want to talk for myself?
So that's your responsibility.
Yeah.
Kick in. I am not here for my own therapy. Afterwards, I'll go to my mentor, I go to my supervisor, and then I get some help, right? At this moment. So to be meaningful, you say, I'm responsible for my client. And this is something, before you actually mention something for yourself, you know the trigger. And then you're going to start thinking, what is the purpose of this if I mention it, right? You use it as a tool only when you can see this disclosure could be a tool to lead the client, to help the client fulfill what my obligation is for them, right? It is meaningful for you, but at that moment, you are looking at the purpose for the client. And it's not easy. Okay. Knowing another person's true intention and feelings through effective communication. Having practiced, I think you could read that. Okay. Understanding intervention. How could you understand yourself? And how do you understand your client? In our practice, we had life review sessions. It's amazing what people learn about themselves. Have you ever been to a group for life review? And this is one that's very powerful tool in a group for life review. And we don't have time, but this is it. What are the greatest successes and who had the most impact on your life. And actually we were going to have a book on life review published by Cambridge, but we haven't had time to get it done. But it is very important. And we have conducted some life review group at different ages. And it is amazing how they review themselves, even though when sometimes it's hard. It's heartbreaking. But after that, it seems to relieve. They say, I have said it. Now I could have done better. You know what I mean? When you have so much emotion and it's buried, what we talk about under, the iceberg. And sometimes you need courage to bring it out. And what might be the vehicle for that? It's life review. And Paul is writing his autobiography because people have been asking for it. And it was not easy. Every chapter is a struggle because every chapter of life, you relived what happened. So sometimes your client may need that. You may not have the time for it, but you could ask your client to say, well, why don't you write a biography of yourself? Do an autobiography. I don't have to read it if you don't want me to. And I have an 11-year-old. She's writing her life story. I didn't know that when we were in session. And she said to me, she said, you know what, at night, sometimes I couldn't sleep. I said, well, why? Something's bothering me. So I took a pen and I started writing. And that seems to help me. And now my mom will come and clean my room, and then they will see it. I have to hide it. So that, and you know what? She was, after now she's 14, she said, I got stacks of this. And that is her method of helping herself, and review her life and go on with it. I did not ask, could I read it or something? And she said, this is what I wrote yesterday. So when they learn to trust you, they will let you know what means are good to help them to relive the past, even though it is painful. And I think that is one way of knowing self. And also here are the exercises. You describe your aspiration, your best self, you keep a daily journal. What are the meaningful moments? What are the meaningful moments of each day? Now, yesterday, what is the most meaningful moment for you? Don't have to share if it's secret. What's the most meaningful moment for you?
In counseling, you asking?
For your life. Yeah. Your meaningful moment. Yes, Joe?
Just for an example, you want to hear?
Yeah.
So my wife is not a huge sports fan, and she was in Pennsylvania for a couple of days visiting her aunt, and she met me at this restaurant last night, and she watched the Raptors game with me. And she's not a sports fan, but she was really watching the game and getting into it, and it was just really, I said, wow, this just feels so good. You're watching a basketball game with me. And it was just meaningful.
Why is it meaningful for you?
Because she was doing something and sharing with me something that she doesn't usually do.
Yeah.
I know it sounds pretty...
It is. No, it is meaningful. You see, we have to catch those meaningful moments. Then we know our life is not dry and sad and heavy, right? So this is why it's a habit, isn't it? If you form a habit of looking for meaningful moments, your life would be a lot lighter, more enjoyable, isn't it? Yeah, yesterday I have many meaningful moments because we have been so busy And with Paul's pain, and you have so many roles. Myself has been divided in so many ways. And I thought, we're going to have 2 days from 9 to 4. How am I going to cope? Right? And being a perfectionist, like stumble like this, it's not my style, right? I mean, just, how am I going to survive? And yet, you have this resilience in you. We can overcome it, doesn't matter what. The timing, right? I mean, I could say, well, okay, we have canceled invitations and to speak or to write. We have canceled. So there are things that you could manage, but there are things you cannot manage. So the whole thing is, you say, I can do it, right? Who said, I can do it? Okay. The meaningful moment was when the door was open. I see people like you smiling. That was meaningful for me. All of a sudden, I have forgotten I only have 4 hours sleep. And I've forgotten that I went to digital guys and they couldn't get my video, straightened out. What the heck, I say, we are here. We are, we all understanding and we are doing together. So that's my meaningful moment. Then afterwards, I said to Paul, you need to get out. Just get out, have dinner. And that was meaningful. You see, so often we live our day just like robots, like a routine. You never reflect. So I think self-reflection is one of the most important things in our life as therapists. Because we are not only going through our lives with all the ups and downs, we also pretend to live in lives of other people. I say pretend because we actually don't live there, but we would enter into the world, try to understand what they go through. So there is a lot of demand for us. So therefore, we really feel that we need to have some protection for ourselves. And we understand our soul situation, our mentality. Today, you might be stressed, tomorrow you may not. So in other words, our days are changing, but if we don't have a center. So this is why what we do is meaningful, therefore you don't mind going through it. Harder, fine, I enjoyed it. I love, this group, because it's smaller. And also you're more mature, and I really think that you are interacting with one another. To me, that is very meaningful. All right, responsibilities, we emphasize that a lot. Freedom and responsibilities go hand in hand. Doing the right thing and finding the right solution. And choose appropriate reactions and actions in situations of conflicting values and demand. We talk about, the cultural conflicts and everything else. We got to choose and say, what is appropriate? What is the right thing to do? Not just the action, but is that the right reaction to it? How often when people tell you something, I don't know, I'll just give you an example. All of a sudden you reacted with shock. Okay? Is that helpful or not helpful? But that's real you, right? So sometimes when you express shock, people apologize, don't they? Oh, I'm sorry. Because they said, I don't want to shock you. So as a therapist, you have to be responsible and say, what is the appropriate reaction to it? I have a client. She was 13. She was 13. I had a session with her parents. And we were in the middle of a good session. The phone rang. And their phone, the cell phone of the father's cell phone rang. and he got a message from their son, the older brother of this 13-year-old girl, and said she had taken an overdose. What would your reaction be? You're in the middle of a session with her parents. The brother called, says she had taken an overdose.
So you're asking what would our reaction be as a therapist or as?
Yeah, you. You are the therapist. You or me. Catherine.
I think I would express my concern and release the parents to go to their daughter as they needed.
How do you feel in your gut?
Like you get punched in the gut.
You get tense, right? So when things like that happen, your whole body started to react. The first thing you have is that is urgent, right? Second thing is, what's the action to take? What about your reaction as a person in front of your client? How many people involved in crisis intervention? Practically all of us, right? And the reaction is what? When the situation is tense, you are more calm. Isn't that the reaction we have? So this is why when you have situation with your client, your reaction is very real. And then almost at split moment, you know what you need to do. And therefore, we could control our reaction. What if you say, oh my God, then the parents say, what are we going to do, right?
That's not helpful.
Yeah. And you just got the message. You're very calm. You say, just tell them call 911. And just say you're on your way home. And make sure that they're all, ready for the ambulance to come in. Or whatever, the police to come in. And, and if you are, religious, you could say a short prayer. Or you could say, I'll pray for you, or something to keep them calm. So our action and reaction influence the client and the success of your session. Okay, yeah, you hold yourself accountable for your behavior. And Paul mentioned a situation where the wife complained and always did not take any responsibility. You do have clients like that. But you could still teach them responsibilities. In the back of their mind, they will think about it. And even they would not admit that they are changing. You see the reaction. Because, human, it's so complex. You compensate for the things that you don't want people to know, but you actually take the right action. So always do the right thing. And okay, you take ownership of your life, full responsibility for building the future, and committed to action for the goal. That's why pure is purpose, understanding, taking responsible action, and then you are entitled to enjoy. If you can, you re-evaluate. Okay, so you fully engage with here and now and responsible for self-care and for compassion, and also care for others. And that's another thing that I said, you've got to learn self-care. Today, our program is packed. So just say, hopefully we'll share something about how do you exercise self-care so you don't get burnout. Because I find that psychotherapists, they get burned out easily because we are assuming so many responsibilities. Especially if you work for an agency. Sometimes, how many clients do you take? 5? 6?
Sometimes 7, my friend told me. Sometimes 7.
Yeah. How do you feel if you take 7 clients a day?
she was so sleepy, and her husband complained that he has no life because after work she was coming back home and she was just
Exhausted.
exhausted. Yeah.
Exactly. Are you good for all your clients if you work seven cases a day?
Also, she was angry about her boss because, angry about the life. She was just,
You're not good for anybody. You're overworked, right? You burn out. And this is why, but what can you do? An agency said, we need clients, right? Otherwise we won't be able to hire you, we won't have money to pay and all things. Again, the practical things will in the way of our idealistic environment. But you've got to protect yourself somehow. How could you do that? If you are required to do 7 hours of therapy in a day, you start from what? 9 o'clock? 5 patients? 3 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 5, and then 2 after in the evening? Boy, you'll burn out.
Unless you can take breaks, like in between, for example, we may schedule a time we can have maybe a 2-hour break in between or something like that, I don't know. I mean, some way I can probably think of it that way.
And the worst part is after each client you have to write a report.
I wonder if you even have time to like consult and prep for all that stuff, right?
You see, we are not taking care of ourselves, right? And I usually tell my students, I said, oh, they're so conscientious, right? You're supposed to come at 10 o'clock and the clients arrived at 10 to 10. And you are still with another client. As soon as the client left and you see them sitting there, right? So being conscientious, therapist, they say, oh, come on in. So when do you write your little note and put it away? Hopefully you expand on it when at the end of the day, and you cry. I said, no. Their appointment's at 10 o'clock. You got 10 minutes. That is where you go to the washroom, have a drink of water, and get your report, and then you come. So in other words, you give yourself permission. So often we do not give ourselves permission to look after ourselves. We let people, because we're so kind, we're compassionate, and we also be so proud too that we can help them out of a rut, right? But that is not always self-care. It's so important. And also another trick is, if you take 3 depressed clients and 1 with trauma, the 4 clients together, emotionally, you cannot deal with it because they just come in to talk to you for an hour. They could overload you with all the stress that they have, but you know that you already got 3 stressful situations, so you are carrying a heavy burden. So you have to be very smart. And you said, okay, here's a case of depressed person. I want a case that's a little easier to handle in there. Or I could do 2 depressed, and then I could do another one. In other words, don't pack yourself with the same. You could do your scheduling so that you balance your day, so that you have time to reflect and you can time to rest and allow your brain to rest and to refresh. And that's part of, self-care too. Okay. Yes, these are just interventions. You can look into that. And then, enjoyment and evaluation, you can look into that too. Okay, the assess the degree of satisfaction with the situation you have. And I think this is important, don't you think? At the end of the session, and say, what have I? Okay, how do you assess your session? You're using yourself in the situation. At the end of the day, it is the client's goal that you need to fulfill. So how do you assess your own success in that situation?
I know in the past I actually used a tool, an outcome rating scale or session rating, the session rating scale.
So you have one of those?
Both of them I used to use, one at the beginning, one at the end, that assesses.
Uh-huh.
I use it a lot. I haven't used it in a while.
Right, right. Anybody wants to know how? You know what I do? I don't assess my sessions. I ask my client, what have we accomplished today? What have you, what are the things that you have learned? And I think it is so important that the client have the take-home message. And then you could, so often you say, well, okay, what are we going to do next time? Or you have ideas that say, aha, she had learned such and such, so next time I could continue. You'll be surprised when you come in and say, well, last time you learned this and this, and we're going to, nope, they talk about completely different things, right? Well, that's okay. You allowed your clients to do the leading. Okay, here have I achieved what I set out to do? Am I happy with how I live my life? And is this love? Why am I still unhappy? Well, Bonnie said, I want to love and to be loved. But, you have a lover, you have love, but why am I still unhappy? So there are things that's not fulfilled. So as a psychotherapist, we really need to know what is there for me? What is the meaning of what I'm doing? And I think this is the thing of, you look after yourself and you look after, then you can be able to help others. Self-regulation depends on your own reflection. All right, so here's the picture of pure. What is the meaning of meaning? Meaning is to pursue a purpose or goal, to seek to understanding self and the situation, and to take personal responsibilities, and enjoy the process and the journey. And that will be a meaningful and fulfilling life. Isn't that simple? Then we talk about, we can't define, but does it make sense? Okay, the 20 minutes I want to talk about interventions. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Yes?
Could you, on the next page, I'm having a hard time seeing the 4 life trajectories. Yeah, thank you. Oh, thanks. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Could you read them, please?
Okay, here is a fortunate life. This one is resilient life. And this is ordinary life. We all have an ordinary every day, you go to work, you come home, you eat, you sleep, and that's ordinary life. And there is a tragic life. So, does it make sense? You are fortunate because everything goes your way and you don't have any ups and downs, How many of those lives exist? Not a whole lot. But the tragic life is that, you know what they call, I don't like that word, affluenza. Have you heard about affluenza? The 21-year-old boy who doesn't know anything about sickness, poor, he's so rich. Yep. And then he doesn't even know other people's lives. He couldn't care less. And he was driving his sports car across a stop sign and killed 3 young people and the grandfather. He killed 4 people in a car crash. And they said, he's not responsible. He doesn't even know about the tragedy of human. He has everything he wanted, have anything, The mother gave him all the best he can. And therefore, the reason that he was charged because of affluenza. Where's the sense of responsibility? Do you not have anything? Well, how was he brought up? Was he asked to wash his own face and do his own thing? Or the servants always give him everything he wanted? And there are people who are rich like that. When we visited, when the children were very, very young, and we visited a family in Hong Kong, and then the children needs a milk or something, and the mother will call the servant and say, I said, okay, we're going to get some milk for my son. I said, oh no, Mabel can do it. Mabel, bring them. Come on, they have feet. They can go to the fridge. They can pour their own milk. Why do you need a servant to serve you with a glass of milk? Well, this is the thing. When you have everything so well, all of a sudden, tragedy. You're not responsible. You don't know why you live. You don't know anything. And that's tragic, isn't it? And then, of course, this is resilient. How many people have gone through hell in their earlier life? And they said, I am going to make something of myself. I have meaning to live. I have a purpose to live. And I know where I'm at. And I know who I am. And I'm not going to let them, to squash me. And I'm going to look up. And I'm going to build something. And I'm going to be somebody. So I mean, a meaningful life, you could take all the different tracks. But if you build up your client, you say, I am going to overcome all the dark side of human. I cannot avoid it, right? And I just have to rise above it. And I train myself so that I am strong enough, I'm resilient enough, I'm going to reach the goals that I want. Then your life would be meaningful. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. That's more research on that. Resilience, the path to resilience, you could read up that. Maybe I could do a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time on this. What is a set of intervention in meaning therapy? Now, overall, meaning therapy is pure, P-U-R-E. Then how are we going to reach that? How are we going to help people? So there are A, B, C, D, E. It's a little different from the other orientation. So what is A? A is accept reality. B is believe the possibilities. C is commit to achieve the goal. D is to discover new resources and solutions. E is evaluate and enjoy the progress. Okay, that is my excitement about meaning therapy is A, B, C, D, E strategy. And I find it is the hardest to do A. Acceptance. In my experience with my clients, to accept what is unfair, to accept what I cannot change, to accept, the things that's thrown at me, to accept my own disabilities, my own faults, my own shortcomings. That was the hardest struggle. I spent more sessions on acceptance than on any other areas. So I don't think we could accept totally, but we could move one step at a time to accept something, to be responsible for something, to have to, yes, I am short. I accept that. Okay, I could compensate for that. Yes, I am of different cultural background. I have to learn to accept it. I should be proud of where I am. Because, so often you just have to be learning how to accept. And there's a lot of areas that the clients can tell you how they can accept. Okay? So that is the hardest part. We believe that life is worth living. We all have faith. Spirituality is there. Whether you wanted to acknowledge it or not, it is there. So you have to have faith. But I find that it's so important to believe in oneself. B is that I believe I can do it. I believe I have the ability to do it. I believe that I can learn. I believe that I can be creative. You see, so often we do not discover people's talents. I'm sure you have a lot of skills that you haven't even discovered. And so we have to encourage our client or ourselves to believe in ourselves, believe in the things, the talents that we have not discovered. So, and also we need to, for Christians, we believe that God has a purpose in my life. And God can help me in these situations. Or if you believe in other, religion, and you think that is a bigger power outside yourself that can help. So believing is very strong because you have to believe in yourself and you have to believe in the bigger one outside yourself that could help. Commitment, and that is another biggie. How well, to what extent you commit yourself to fulfill those goals. You make excuses. I have no time, okay? I am too tired, and I'm weak, and somebody wanted to, help me doing this and that. You make all kind of excuses. But if you're focusing, you say, yes, I have this goal, I want to reach the goal, and I wanted to commit myself. And it's amazing. I think young people follow this a lot conscientiously. Then you have, other family members in the group. They always depend on other people to do it. He did not do this, or she would have to do such and such. I think it's a commitment, personal commitment. So that's part of the meetings intervention. And I love discovery. You surprise yourself. After you have set your goal, you committed yourself, you accepted all this, and then you believe that you can do it, and you commit yourself to do it, even though it was some kind of foreign to you, but you tried it, and it was just wonderful when I come back and they come in and say, guess what, I did such and such, I didn't know I was able to do this. And that's discovery. And that is the most exciting part of the whole approach. You discover something that you never thought you could. You discover something you never know that you had. And it is amazing. And that is the part that we share. And then we celebrate. And then we say, well, okay, we enjoy the results. And I told them, I said, well, we set out years ago, and you're doing so well. Now you're graduating, and you're from a D, F and D. Now you're doing B plus and A's. You have accomplished, right? But through hard work, through accepting, believing, committing, and it was good. So I said, well, you don't need me anymore. No. I said, okay, how about, you do such thing. We'll see you every other week. Okay. Then we said, how about every month? And then gradually they're at the university level, like the father comes back and says, she's doing so well. And that is our reward. So this is kind of a very brief, very rough overview of the meaning center approach. So we are kind of integrating, because you can tell in each area we are using CBT, right? Planning, goals, and everything else. And we also talk about understanding self, that is a psychoanalysis, a psychodynamic. And then we also talk about behavioral, how we can do that. And humanistically, we talk about, we feel the same way, how you share yourself with others so they come. So this is a kind of an integrative framework that you can follow through without just saying, well, am I going to give them homework? Am I going to do such and such? Do I do a gym analysis? Or do I going to do art therapy? No, it's just the more you practice, the advantage of this is that you bring all the tools that you have into this framework and make it work. Does it make sense? And let's see if I have anything. Yeah. Okay, so good timing, 10 to 12. So I was just giving you a very, very brief overview. And in your handout, and there are more details. And if you wanted to learn more, you wanted to ask some questions, and you have situations that you don't know where how would meaning-centered approach deal with this? Do feel free to email me. No names, no age, nothing. Yeah, and then Paul could give you some hints how to do, how direction, or I can tell you, some of the experiences that I have in this situation. So I think that will be very, very, so this is exactly what we need to do. Commitment is a biggie. Yeah. And this is what I love. Okay, we're not going to go into different models today. Okay, the double vision. We are talking about every session with a client and here and now. But that is important. But you get very short-sighted if you just talk about from week to week. That's why the goal, the purpose is so important. You talk about the future. So in other words, yes, we talk about now, but how does this help you build the future goals? And I think that really helps. It was funny. When I had a young lady coming to me, and the first thing the mother said, the mother and father were there, and let me see, how old was she? She was about, she's 11, now she's 14. And the mother said, the first thing is that, I let her do what she wants to do. I never pressure her for high grades or anything. Isn't that kind of odd? The first thing in the back of my mind is that, what was the purpose? What was the meaning that she's trying to impress me that she is not pressuring the daughter to achieve high academic goals? What was behind all that? The very first session. That was very interesting. Because the mother always worried about her putting her desire onto the girl. So she wanted me to take over. Maybe she does have a tendency to do that. So to warn me not to do that to her. Because grade 11, at age of 11, and I kind of find it very interesting. But it gives me an insight. What kind of environment are they living in? It was really interesting. The second session, when I had the daughter by herself, she's intelligent, she's very sociable, and she's got lots of talents. But she's under the shadow of her older sister who just started university. At that time was only graduating from grade 12. And the parents always say the older sister has the ability, she's all together, and she is academically, good. And this one, 5 years younger, she needs protection, and so I'm not demanding so much from her. So what does that mean to the little girl? She was underestimated. She was not provided with an environment to enrich and to discover her talent. So, as a professional, I do a few things, let her do some evaluation and scales, things like that. Wow, I saw this girl has superior intelligence, very astute, dealing with people. There's just so much to be there. So what do you do? And we talk about it. What do you really want to do? I don't know. I always need the protection of the dad and the mom because she was raised in fear and never actualizing herself. And you wouldn't believe it. She's a leader. She had the baseball team. She's in the band, and she's got B+, the lowest in French. Everything is A+. And I got the mom back together. And she relieved. I said, you know what? It is so important that you have to develop your child the way she should be evaluated. She should be trained. And they're very happy. So, I mean, so often we are not rescuers, but in a sense we are, right? So this is why we need to know all the skills, all the things that we have learned to pass on to our clients. And then we could feel good, work ourselves out of a job. But then they say, well, if I work ourselves out of a job, then I have no job. No, the more people you send out, the more people are coming in. And that is a reward for good work. And that is a reward for lunch.
Nice translation.
And back here at 1 o'clock,